So last video we left off with nematodes and seamount chains and how the reason why the older ones are smaller is because of subsidence due to cooling. This is where we're going to talk about coral reef development. It's weird to think about coral reefs being with the plate tectonics chapter, but if you remember that coral reefs tend to occur around islands, this might make more sense. So Darwin is famous in marine biology because of his papers on coral reef development, and he's the first one to kind of hypothesize how this occurred and how it was related to subsidence of volcanic islands. So as the volcanoes subside and shrink down, we're going to get different features. So just to remember, corals are colonial animals. They're in the jellyfish family, and they need shallow, warm water. This is because the vast majority of them have photosynthetic algae that live within their tissues. And these reefs take millions of years to grow. So things to keep in mind as we move forward. The first stage in this picture that you can see on this page, figure 230 in your book, is important. So take a few minutes to look at this picture. The first stage is the fringing reef, and this is when the volcanic island is still above ground and frequently still volcanic. And a reef forms right along the edges of the island. You can see it right here. And it's in shallow water, and it's attached to the island. And this is a dangerous stage for the development of the reef since the lava can run off and kill the reef. If the sea level doesn't change or if the island does not subside, though most of them do, this is the stage at which reefs will stop. So many islands have fringing reefs. As the island moves off the hotspot, it begins to cool and it subsides, so it begins to shrink down. And the reef grows in relation to the reef. As the reef subsides with the island, the animals grow on top of each other, about 3 to 5 meters per 1,000 years, and this pushes them back up into the sunlight that they need for their photosynthetic algae. The barrier reef is a very common one. It's got a small island in the middle, and it's surrounded. Really common in the Indo-Pacific, and the barrier reef itself, the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, is an example of a barrier reef. They can be absolutely ginormous. The last stage is the atoll. The atoll is when the volcano completely submerges, it just sinks down. They will actually frequently not only sink down to the low level of the seafloor, but because of the tube underneath, they will actually frequently collapse inside themselves and create what's called a blue hole. So then the reef is formed. You get a circular reef with a deeper area in the middle. There's some special types of circulation, reverse circulation that go on in these. And eventually, as these islands grow, these atoll islands, they grow, they can actually get trees and things on them. This picture shows the Society Islands, which is basically Tahiti, Bora Bora, in that vicinity. And in this picture, you can see all of the, this one right here, Bora Bora, is an atoll. And this island right here, there's island in the middle. And there's barrier reef around it. So you can see the different stages. Make sure you know the 3 stages and which features are typically associated with each. One of the last things we're going to talk about is where plate tectonics is going to take us, and this is a good spot to talk about the Wilson cycle. We talked about it very slightly when we did divergent plate boundaries, but these are the 6 steps of the Wilson cycle, and make sure you know kind of the general form as well as examples. But basically, in this first one, we have rifting and uplifting occurring, and it begins to create sutures in the surface of the continent. And you can see this at the East African Rift Valley, which is we've saw pictures of in the slides before. Then, as this suturing continues in the fracturing of the earth, you get water coming in, usually from a marginal sea nearby. And where you would see an example of that is the Red Sea, and they tend to be very shallow. They have coastlines that are very similar on either side, and you basically get a little tiny sea with a mid-ocean ridge in the middle of it. Over time, as it continues to spread, you'll get a larger area. The Atlantic Ocean is an example of a mature ocean, and on either side of it, you will eventually begin to get trenches and island arcs. When you get these trenches and island arcs, it's like a conveyor belt, and then the ocean begins to shrink. So you have a trench on one side here, and the plate would have moved from here, and you would have had a spreading center there. An example of this is the Pacific Ocean. Pacific Ocean is getting smaller at about the same rate the Atlantic Ocean is getting bigger. And then finally, you have the last two stages, which are terminal and suturing. And that's when the continents come back together completely. And the example of that would be the Himalayas. So paleogeography is a science related to this, and it's sort of the science that came about because of plate tectonics. And some of the things you should know already, I guess you know that 180 million years ago, Pangaea broke up. 45 million years ago, India collided with Asia. So there's a lot of study about the ancient climate and also the ancient location of plates. This matters when you're trying to figure out climate. The last thing we're going to talk about is where the plates are going to be. So, plate tectonics is a theory. Yes, it's happening. We've talked about that before, theories versus facts. But in order for it to be a theory, one of the things it has to do is make testable predictions. And thus far, we have been able to predict the movement of the plates, and we can test it very quickly with satellites now. This diagram shows where the plates will be in about 50 million years or so. And I don't know if you can tell here, but Australia's shifted northward. Africa's gone to the northeast. The South American plate continues to move away from the African plate. One of the things you can't really see here, but I'll try to show you, is it's expected that North America and South America will completely disconnect. They're moving in slightly different directions and they'll rip apart, sort of permanently making the Panama Canal useless. Eventually, as all of these, you can see that from the mid-Atlantic ridge, there's generally a plate movement towards the Pacific Ocean on both sides. And eventually they will come back together and form a new supercontinent in about 500 million years. And that's the end of the chapter. We'll have a quiz probably on Friday.